Everyone thinks the hardest part about owning a pool is the endless maintenance. The chlorine, the filters, the leaves that fall in just after you've skimmed the water clean. But they're wrong. The hardest part is when someone decides your little piece of paradise isn't yours at all. When a neighbor claims it as their own. That neighbor was Karen. The first time I noticed something strange, it was subtle. Bare footprints leading away from the pool. A towel I didn't recognize, damp and crumpled on the chair. And that smell, cheap perfume clinging to the night air. I told myself maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the kids had left something out. But deep down, I knew someone had been here, someone who didn't belong. The truth revealed itself a week later. I pulled back the blinds one humid Texas evening, and there she was, Karen in a bright pink swimsuit, sipping wine like she owned the place. Lounging on my deck chair, floating in my pool. And when I stepped outside, instead of apologizing, instead of acting embarrassed, she just smirked. "Oh, don't be so selfish," she said, swirling her wine like some suburban queen. "It's just water." Selfish, that word stung, because I wasn't selfish. I had worked 20 years in construction for this. Every beam, every nail, every backbreaking shift had led me here, to this house, this backyard, this pool where my kids could laugh and splash on summer afternoons. It wasn't a mansion in Beverly Hills, but it was mine. Ours, and no one, least of all Karen, was going to take it from me. At first I tried to handle it neighborly, a calm reminder, a forced smile. "Karen, this is a private pool, please ask first." But Karen wasn't built for boundaries. She laughed in my face, called me uptight, waved me off like I was an annoying waiter at her table. And then she doubled down. It wasn't just her anymore. Suddenly she was bringing friends, 3, 4, sometimes 6 people piling through the side gate as if they had season passes. They blasted music, popped corks, left bottles and chip bags scattered across the deck. They'd treat my backyard like a carnival, and every morning I'd wake up to the wreckage. Floating straws, sunscreen oil slicking across the water. Once I even found a slice of soggy pizza sinking at the bottom of the pool. And every time I confronted her, she leaned on that one word, selfish. "What kind of neighbor doesn't share?" she sneered. "We're building community." But community isn't trespassing. Community isn't stealing. And community isn't bragging about it online. The night I saw her Facebook post, that's when my patience snapped. A picture of her, arms raised in victory, right in my pool. The caption, "Best free amenity in the neighborhood, HOA privilege, sharing is caring." I stared at that screen, my blood boiling, all those years of sweat and sacrifice reduced to a joke. My property, my sanctuary, turned into her photo backdrop. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just angry, I was determined. I started documenting everything. Photos of footprints, videos of her sneaking in, screenshots of her smug posts. I considered filing a complaint with the HOA, but I knew how that would go. Karen thrived in chaos. She'd twist the narrative, paint me as the villain, turn the meeting into her stage. No, I needed something better, something she wouldn't see coming. One evening I sat in my chair staring at the pool, beer sweating in my hand. That's when my eyes fell on the bottle of industrial-strength bleach in the corner of the shed. It was meant for scrubbing stains off the patio. The warning label screamed, "Caution." But in my mind, it whispered something else. A possibility. I didn't need to yell at Karen. I didn't need the HOA or the cops. All I had to do was let her keep trespassing. On my terms. That night, lying awake in bed, my wife stirred beside me and asked why I was smiling. "Nothing," I whispered, "just planning a little neighborhood hospitality." And for the first time in months, I felt alive again. The thing about people like Karen is this: they don't just break rules. They perform while breaking them. Every invasion into my backyard was louder, bolder, messier than the last. One Saturday, I pulled into the driveway after running errands. Even before I cut the engine, I heard it, thumping bass rattling against the fences, the kind of cheap speaker noise that makes your ribs buzz. I rounded the corner and froze. 6 of them. Karen, her girlfriends, 2 men I didn't recognize, and some shirtless guy with a beer belly that looked like it hadn't seen the sun in a decade. They sprawled across my deck chairs, cracking cans of White Claw, splashing in my pool like they were at a Vegas hotel. Karen spotted me, raised her glass, and shouted over the music, "Oh, look who's home." "Don't worry, neighbor, we're just keeping the water warm for you." My fists clenched, my jaw locked. I managed only 3 words through gritted teeth. "Get out now." But Karen just smiled that cat-like smile, slow and mocking. "Relax, it's called community spirit. You can't keep this all to yourself." Community spirit. The words echoed, hollow and cruel. What she meant was theft, plain and simple. And the worst part wasn't even the noise or the trash or the chaos. It was the trail they always left behind. Chip bags drifting across the lawn, bottle caps glinting in the grass. One morning, unbelievably, I even found a greasy slice of pizza floating in the shallow end. My filter nearly choked to death on melted cheese. That night, as I skimmed the wreckage from the water, I thought, this isn't just disrespect. This is war. But Karen wasn't finished. Oh no, she wanted to make it personal. Scrolling through Facebook a few days later, I nearly dropped my phone. There she was again, posing in the shallow end, oversized sunglasses and a floppy hat captioned, "Living the good life. Blessed. HOA perks." The comments poured in. "OMG, Karen, that pool is gorgeous. So jealous, girl. Where is this resort?" And then the one that nearly made me smash the phone against the wall. "Neighborhood perks, baby winking face." My blood boiled so hot I could feel my pulse in my teeth. She wasn't just sneaking in anymore. She was bragging, flaunting it, turning my property into her trophy. That was when I decided to test her. The next weekend, I deliberately left the side gate unlocked. By noon, laughter floated across the yard. I peered through the blinds, and there they were. Karen on a neon raft, sipping wine like Cleopatra. Her friends splashing, their laughter echoing down the block. In that moment, I realized the truth. Karen didn't think I would ever act. To her, I was just the grumpy guy next door, harmless, powerless, a pushover. And that was her fatal mistake. Still, part of me hesitated. I could call the cops. I could file an HOA complaint. But what good would it do? The cops wouldn't show up for trespassers in a pool. The HOA was her circus ring. She'd twist the story, paint herself as the victim, maybe even get me fined for having a pool too tempting. No, if I wanted Karen to stop, I had to hit her where it hurt most. Her vanity. See, Karen lived for appearances. The hair dye, the nails, the makeup layered on like armor. Every strand of her hair had to gleam. Every selfie had to sparkle. She craved the illusion of perfection. And that was when the bleach plan stopped being a fantasy. It became a mission. I started researching late at night, long after my wife had gone to bed. Pool maintenance forums, chemical guides, accident reports. I read stories of people who'd overdosed their chlorine treatments, what it did to skin, to hair, to fabric. The answers made me laugh out loud. Dry, brittle hair, itchy skin, faded swimsuits, nothing dangerous, just humiliation bottled up in liquid form. Bingo! The next morning, I went to the hardware store, tossed 3 more jugs of bleach into my cart, nodded at the cashier like I was just another suburban dad tackling spring cleaning. She had no idea she was ringing up my secret weapon. Back home, I stashed the bottles in the shed behind the lawn mower. And then I studied Karen's patterns, Tuesdays and Thursdays for smaller dips, Saturdays for full-blown pool parties. Perfect! I wasn't just going to dump the bleach and leave. No, I wanted to see it. I wanted to witness the exact moment that smug smirk dissolved into panic. So I angled my security cameras just right, tested the audio feed, made sure I'd capture everything. All week I played it cool, waved politely at Karen when she watered her flowers, nodded when she smirked at me from across the fence, let her believe she had one. Friday night after the kids were asleep, I slipped out to the shed. The moonlight shimmered across the pool, glassy and calm. I twisted the cap off the first jug, poured it into the deep end. The water swallowed it whole, swirling like smoke beneath the surface. Then the second jug, then the third. The sharp chemical smell stung my throat, but I kept going, stirring the water with the pool net until the mixture spread evenly. By the time I was done, the pool looked the same as always, clear, sparkling, inviting, but I knew better. This wasn't just water anymore, it was a trap. I stood there in the silence, the pool glowing under the floodlight, and I whispered to myself, "Enjoy your spa day, Karen." For the first time in months, I felt calm, because the stage was set. And by tomorrow afternoon, Karen's little rain was about to come crashing down. The first sound I heard that afternoon wasn't a scream. It was the gate, that familiar creak, and then laughter, the kind that always pushed a little too loud against the quiet of our street. For months that creak had meant trespass. Today it meant the moment of truth. They walked in like they owned the world. Karen in her sunglasses, hair piled high in the same practiced way, friends trailing like admirers at a parade. They dropped towels, purses, a trail of plastic and glitter on my deck. For a beat, everything looked exactly as before. Sun, music, splashes, the kind of normal that used to make my chest ache with small, domestic happiness. And then the scratching started. At first it was subtle. One of them, a woman with a loud laugh, paused mid-kick and rubbed the inside of her forearm. A puzzled frown. Another, who'd been flirting with his phone, went still and began patting down his swimsuit. Karen, queen of the cul-de-sac, sank lower in her floating chair and reached a hand for her hair the way someone reaches for a talisman. Her smile flickered. Confusion edged in. I watched through the monitor. I had the camera feed on my phone, minimized like a man sneaking peeks at his own theater. It showed their faces in real time, delight turning to confusion, then to panic. A throwaway moment of trespass became a slow-motion unraveling. There was a shriek that broke the afternoon flat like lightning. Karen's voice, high and incredulous, cut through the music. "My hair! Oh my God, my hair!" That sound hit me differently than I expected. For a second there was a cloud of doubt that drifted across my satisfaction, like a shadow on the pool tile. I remembered my kids, their small hands splashing, their trust when they asked if they could swim. I remembered the way my wife used to shake her head at my grumbles and call me petty. But the doubt was a small thing. The louder thing was the raw surge of every insult and every smug post that had landed on my shoulders for months. That surge roared back. They stumbled out. One by one they clambered onto the deck, clutching towels to their arms, faces burning, mouths forming cuss words and apologies at once. Makeup streaked down cheeks. Hair, carefully kissed by box dye, fluffed into a wild, frizzy halo of orange and white. One of the men slid on the wet wood and nearly ate the deck. Another clawed at his shoulders, muttering about a burning itch. They were a study in humiliation. And I, perched safe behind glass and circuitry, felt a grin split my face like sunlight through curtains. My wife found me there with the phone in my hand and that ridiculous grin, and she let out a soft sound that was half scold, half amused. "You did not," she said, but she didn't move to call me a monster. She didn't reach for the phone to dial the cops. She sat beside me and watched the replay, folding her hands in the way she does when she is deciding if she wants to be on my side. It felt in that quiet like complicity, like an ally sitting with you while a bully learns a lesson. They scrambled, sputtering, calling out for towels and water as if an invisible fire had chased them out. I could see neighbors staring from their windows now, necks craned, phones pointed. Someone on the block actually laughed out loud. Children pressed their faces to glass with the kind of unfiltered delight you can't manufacture. Triumph was a smell in the air. When it settles, the aftermath of something like that has shape. Chairs askew. A raft drifting like a sad toy. Half a bottle of wine spilled across the deck like a small, ruined sunset. Karen, the woman who had ruled with clipped sentences and a clipboarded attitude, stood wrapped in a robe, hair a tangled mess, and for the first time since she'd moved in, she looked fragile. Her posture small, her public mask cracked. Humiliation is loud. It echoes. I'll admit, I reveled in the echo. But the story doesn't stay contained to one yard. Rumors travel faster than guilt. The footage, which I'd replayed twice to make sure the angle was clear, became insurance. Not because I wanted to blackmail or to humiliate endlessly, but because truth matters when accusations fly. If Karen tried to spin this as something she could weaponize, as if she were the one wronged, the cameras would be the judge that refused to be fooled. I transferred the clip to a thumb drive, because accuracy is physical when you need it to be. That evening I did something small and calculated. I sent the footage, anonymized, with no hint of my involvement, to a few neighbors. The subject line was simple: "Caught on camera, pool party crashers." The response was immediate and messy and satisfying. A neighbor texted, "OMG, is that?" Another replied, "Serves her right." A little chorus of justice. The video started moving through the neighborhood like an electric current. People watched and their faces softened. For once, the tight-lipped sideways glances that used to follow me disappeared. They were no longer glances of fear. They were glances of support. That night when the HOA meeting rolled around, something felt different in the air. Karen appeared, scarf coiled high around her neck, as if armor could hide the frizz and the shame. She tried to use the meeting to flip the script, to call attention to chemical hazards and to demand an investigation. The room listened briefly before a screen came to life with my footage, trespass, laughter, the meltdown. You could hear the room change pitch, gasps, then laughter. Embarrassment bled out of Karen like dye in the rain. When the board voted to fine the trespassers and ban them from amenities, the sound in the room wasn't triumphal cruelty. It was relief. A community exhaled, but even that felt complicated. I watched Karen, who'd finally tuned her identity to be seen and obeyed, shrink into something smaller and pitiful. Her authority, built on petty rules and loud scolding, had collapsed on itself. For months she had made people walk on eggshells. Now she was the one picking at pieces. Power had shifted. And with power shifting comes responsibility. The responsibility to not become the very thing you despise. That night I sat by the pool after everyone had gone home. The water was calm. My kids slept upstairs, their laughter only a memory in the way a house keeps echoes. My wife was reading, the soft page-turning a domestic symphony. The victory felt at once sweet and strange. I had protected my home. I had protected my family, but I had also crossed a line. Revenge had a taste, and I realized it could linger like a bitter afterbite. Sometimes dignity looks like a quiet refusal to be stepped on. Sometimes dignity looks like ingenuity born of exhaustion. But sometimes dignity demands you check yourself to make sure what you did to stop a bully doesn't turn you into one. I didn't have the answer that night. Only the quiet knowledge that things in our neighborhood had changed irreversibly. Karen's throne had toppled. The street hummed with a new balance. And in the dark, under the pool light, I promised myself to keep watch, not for petty triumphs, but to guard the fragile thing that had been ripped from me. Peace. They say humiliation is like wildfire. Once it sparks, it doesn't stop at the person holding the match. It spreads, it consumes, and in Karen's case, it spread faster than I ever imagined. The morning after her bleach-soaked meltdown, the neighborhood felt different. People who used to avert their eyes when Karen marched by now whispered freely, laughter trailing in their wake. At the coffee shop, I overheard two neighbors chuckling. "Did you see her hair? Looks like a hay bale got electrocuted." At the mailbox, another leaned close and muttered, "Heard her pool party went badly, serves her right." For the first time since moving here, the neighborhood was united. United not in fear of Karen, but in amusement at her downfall. Kids on bikes rode past her house chanting, "Pool witch, pool witch," their voices cutting sharper than any adult's words ever could. And Karen, she vanished. No morning patrols with her clipboard, no barking orders about trash cans, no Facebook rants about community standards. The queen bee had gone underground, licking her wounds in silence. But silence, when it comes to people like Karen, isn't surrender, it's plotting. It started small, a gossip campaign. She'd corner neighbors on their morning walks, tugging at her fried hair, spinning sob stories about how I had chemically assaulted her, how I'd poisoned the pool with malicious intent. She painted herself as the victim of chemical warfare, waving her brittle hair like Exhibit A, but after years of bossing people around, no one was eager to play her audience anymore. People nodded politely, then crossed the street. A few laughed in her face. One neighbor, Doug, even told her flat out, "Karen, you weren't supposed to be in his pool in the first place." That shut her up quick. Next came the legal angle. One Tuesday evening, a police cruiser rolled down our street and stopped in front of my house. My stomach twisted. For a split second, I thought she'd managed to pull the law onto her side. But the officer who stepped out looked more amused than angry. "Evening," he said, knocking on my door. "Got a call from your neighbor about some pool incident." I invited him in, kept my voice calm, steady, measured, showed him the footage. Karen sneaking in, Karen laughing, Karen shrieking with her hands in her hair. By the time the video ended, the officer was chuckling. He shook his head and muttered, "Ma'am, maybe stop breaking into your neighbor's yard," before closing his notepad and heading out. Case closed. Strike two for Karen. But she wasn't done, not by a long shot. A few nights later, she marched up to my front door. No friends, no backup, just fury in human form. Her fists were clenched, her jaw tight enough to crack. I opened the door slowly, leaning against the frame. You think you've won, don't you? She spat. You humiliated me. You ruined my life. I tilted my head, calm as a monk. Karen, I said evenly, you ruined your own life. I just helped speed up the process. Her eyes blazed. This isn't over. People like me don't get pushed aside. I held her gaze, my voice low but sharp. People like you already have been. And then I closed the door before she could answer. For the first time, she didn't bang on it. She didn't scream. She just stood there in silence and slunk away. But the storm wasn't finished. A week later, Karen tried to stage a comeback. She threw another backyard party, inviting what was left of her loyalists. Maybe a dozen people showed up, lured by the promise of free drinks and Karen's fiery speeches. But when they arrived, they didn't find the polished queen they once followed. They found a backyard falling apart. Her pool, neglected and cloudy, rimmed with algae. The deck furniture faded, cushions torn, the grass overgrown. The smell of cheap boxed wine hung heavy in the air. Karen tried to rally them, glass in hand, her voice shrill with desperation. She talked about taking back the neighborhood, about how she'd been wronged, how she'd rise again. But her guests only shifted awkwardly, sipping their wine without conviction. Within an hour, they started trickling out. Excuses about early mornings, babysitters, tiredness, anything to get away. Karen stood alone on her deck, clutching her glass, staring into the murky water like it might give her back her crown. But there are some things no pool can wash clean. Meanwhile, my yard was alive. Neighbors waved when they passed. Parents asked if their kids could come swim, with permission, of course. The same people who once kept their distance now lingered on my lawn, laughing, sharing beers, treating me not as the grumpy recluse with the pool, but as part of the community. The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had spent years using the HOA to divide us, to pit neighbor against neighbor, to rule through fear and shame. And now, her downfall had united the very people she once controlled. But the final nail in her coffin came not from me, not from a camera, not from bleach. It came from the HOA itself. A week later, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board. It arrived in every mailbox, printed in bold black letters. Residents are reminded that trespassing into private property is strictly prohibited. Recent incidents have resulted in fines and disciplinary measures. Let this be a warning. Respect your neighbor's property. They didn't need to name her. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. Karen's shame was official now, immortalized in HOA ink, sealed and delivered to every doorstep in the neighborhood. I caught her one afternoon tearing one of the notices down from the community center, her hands shaking with fury. A group of teenagers walked by and laughed. She tried to glare them into silence, but they only laughed harder. And that was the moment I realized something had changed forever. Karen wasn't feared anymore. She wasn't respected. She wasn't even tolerated. She was a joke. And jokes don't run neighborhoods. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, 2 full weeks had passed since Karen's humiliation. 2 weeks of eerie quiet. No patrols, no angry Facebook posts, no late-night trespassing. For a neighborhood that had lived under her constant buzz for years, the silence felt unnatural, like the air before a storm. I knew better than to think she'd gone for good. People like Karen don't disappear. They wait. They bide their time, and then they strike when they think the crowd has forgotten. The meeting was held in the community center down by the lake. The same stale smell of coffee. The same rows of metal folding chairs. The same neighbors, bored and restless, chatting in low voices. I slipped in late as usual. Nothing made Karen angrier than watching me stroll in halfway through, calm, casual, unbothered. Except this time, she wasn't sitting at the head of the table. She wasn't even on the board anymore. She sat in the front row instead, scarf wrapped tight around her ruined hair, back straight, face painted with thick makeup like war paint. Her eyes followed me as I took a seat in the back. The board president, Michael, a soft-spoken man who'd been elected mostly because no one else wanted the job, cleared his throat and began running through the agenda. Lawn maintenance contracts, tennis court resurfacing, budget allocations for the 4th of July barbecue, the usual suburban snooze fest. And then Karen struck. She shot up from her seat, cutting Michael off mid-sentence. her voice pitched high and sharp, carrying across the room like a siren. "I need to address a serious issue," she announced, clutching her scarf like it was a prop in some courtroom drama. "There is a health hazard in our neighborhood, a swimming pool being improperly maintained, dangerous chemicals misused, children at risk." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors glanced at each other, uneasy, murmuring. Michael raised a hand. "Karen, please wait until open comments." But Karen bulldozed right over him. "I myself was affected," she said, her tone trembling with rehearsed outrage. "I suffered skin irritation, hair damage." Her hand flew to her head, touching the scarf. "Serious distress. This is unacceptable. The homeowner responsible must be investigated and penalized before someone gets hurt." A hush fell, all eyes turned toward me. She was really doing it. She was standing in front of everyone, trying to flip the script, turning herself into the victim and painting me as the reckless villain. I set down my styrofoam cup of coffee, stood slowly, and let the silence stretch. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm even, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Karen," I said, "are you seriously standing here accusing me of mismanaging my own pool?" Her eyes narrowed, lips curling in triumph. "So you admit it then?" I smiled. "Oh no, I'm not admitting anything. I'm just pointing out how fascinating it is that you would have first-hand knowledge of my pool's chemical levels." The room erupted with chuckles. A few full laughs slipped through. Karen flushed crimson. She stammered, I was invited." "Invited?" I raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting, because according to my cameras." I pulled my phone from my pocket. With one tap, the television at the front of the room flickered to life. The footage I'd prepared filled the screen. Karen and her friends slipping through my side gate. Karen floating on her neon raft, sipping wine. Karen shrieking, clutching her hair, scrambling out of the pool in chaos. The room exploded. Some neighbors gasped. Others burst into laughter they couldn't contain. One man in the back muttered loudly, "Serves her right." Karen lunged forward. "This is an invasion of privacy. You can't." Michael raised his hand sharply. "Karen, enough. This footage clearly shows trespassing on private property. You were not invited. You have no grounds to accuse anyone else of wrongdoing." Her mouth opened, closed, opened again like a fish gasping for air. And then a woman from the second row spoke up, voice ringing with disbelief. "Didn't you post pictures of yourself in his pool? HOA perks or something?" Karen sputtered. "That was taken out of context." The laughter grew louder. The tide had turned, and there was no pulling it back. Michael banged his gavel. "This matter is settled. Karen, you and your guests will be fined for trespassing. Additionally, you are banned from using community amenities for the next 6 months." The color drained from her face. "You can't do this," she shrieked. But the board had already moved on to the next item. The whispers, the chuckles, the smirks, those were louder than anything Karen said after that. She slumped back into her chair, scarf slipping just enough to reveal the brittle, frizzed mess underneath. She tugged it tighter, but the damage was done. Her reputation, her power, her carefully cultivated facade, it was all unraveling in front of the very people she once ruled over. I sat back down, sipping my coffee with deliberate calm, and leaned forward just enough to whisper, just loud enough for her to hear. "How's that for community spirit?" Her glare could have melted steel, but for once it didn't matter. The crowd wasn't hers anymore. The fear, the control, the illusion of power, it had all slipped through her fingers. And as the meeting dragged on, something inside me shifted too. I realized I hadn't just defended my pool, I'd changed the balance of the neighborhood. Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. She wasn't the queen bee. She was just Karen, the woman with ruined hair, a bruised ego, and no allies left. But even as I walked home that night with neighbors patting me on the back, congratulating me, laughing at her downfall, I knew something deeper. Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. People like her never are. They lick their wounds, they plot, they wait for their chance to strike again. And when she did, I'd be ready. If humiliation were a disease, Karen was patient zero. After the HOA meeting fiasco, her reputation sank faster than a stone in my pool. Neighbors whispered openly now. Some mocked her outright. Kids pedaled past her house shouting, pool witch," in sing-song voices. Once upon a time, their parents would have hushed them, fearful of Karen's wrath. Now the parents just laughed. And Karen, she was stubborn enough to try clawing her way back. Tyrants don't give up crowns without a fight. Her first attempt was pathetic. Gossip. She cornered neighbors on morning walks, dragging them into hushed conversations. With her brittle hair hidden under a scarf, she painted herself as a victim of chemical warfare. She claimed I had spiked the pool on purpose, that I'd nearly poisoned her, that my little act of selfishness had nearly endangered the whole neighborhood. She waved her fried hair around like it was evidence for trial. But gossip only works if people are willing to listen. And after years of barking orders, lecturing over trash bins, and humiliating kids for riding scooters too fast, no one wanted to listen anymore. Neighbors nodded politely, then crossed the street. A few chuckled. One man, Doug, didn't even bother with politeness. He stopped her mid-sentence and said flatly, "Karen, you weren't supposed to be in his pool in the first place." She froze, lips trembling, and stormed off without another word. Strike one. Her second attempt was more dramatic. One Tuesday evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the horizon, a police cruiser pulled up outside my house. My stomach tightened. For a second, I imagined Karen had actually found a way to twist the law into her weapon. The officer stepped out, looking more tired than stern. He knocked, tipped his hat, and explained the complaint. Karen had reported that her neighbor had poisoned her with dangerous chemicals. I almost laughed. Instead, I invited him inside, calm and measured. I poured him a glass of water, pulled up the footage on my phone, and let the video play. Karen sneaking in, Karen sipping wine, Karen shrieking as her hair frizzed into chaos. By the end, the officer was chuckling. He shook his head. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, who had marched right up behind him, "maybe stop breaking into your neighbor's yard." Her face turned a shade of red I didn't know existed. She sputtered, fumed, and stomped away, muttering threats under her breath. The officer gave me a sympathetic shrug before driving off. Strike two. Her third attempt came not with gossip or cops, but at my front door. One evening I opened it to find her standing there, fists clenched, her whole body vibrating with rage. She didn't waste time with greetings. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat. "You humiliated me, you ruined my life." I leaned casually against the doorframe, my voice calm as a monk's. "Karen, you ruined your own life. I just helped speed up the process." Her eyes blazed. "This isn't over. People like me don't get pushed aside." I stepped closer, my words slow, deliberate. "People like you already have been." And then I closed the door in her face. For the first time, she didn't bang, she didn't scream, she just stood there in silence, and then she walked away. Strike three. But Karen's spiral didn't end there. It never does. She tried to rally her troops again, threw one more backyard party. A comeback show of strength. But when her dwindling circle of loyalists arrived, they didn't find the polished queen bee they remembered. They found a backyard in decay. Her pool was cloudy algae creeping along the edges. Her deck furniture sagged and mildewed. The grass grew wild, untrimmed. Nobody wanted to dip a toe in that water. They sipped cheap boxed wine, shifting awkwardly as Karen tried to fire them up with speeches about taking back the neighborhood. It didn't work. They left early, one by one, muttering excuses about babysitters and early mornings. Within an hour, she stood alone on her deck, clutching her wine glass like it might save her from drowning. She stared into the murky pool, her reflection rippling, crownless. Meanwhile, my yard was alive. Neighbors who once kept their distance now waved, stopped by for a beer, even asked if their kids could come over and swim with permission. My wife smiled more. My kids laughed louder. For the first time in months, the air in my backyard felt light again. And Karen's house, it grew quieter by the day. Overgrown lawn, wilted roses, an empty driveway, the queen bee had lost her hive. The final humiliation came a week later, when the HOA sent out their monthly newsletter. Right there, printed in bold black ink for every resident to read. Residents are reminded that trespassing into private property is strictly prohibited. Recent incidents have resulted in fines and disciplinary measures. Let this be a warning. Respect your neighbor's property. They didn't name her. They didn't have to. Everyone knew. I caught her one afternoon tearing the notice down from the bulletin board by the community center. Her hands shook with fury. A group of teenagers walked by, snickering. "Hey, pool witch," one called out. She tried to glare them into silence, but they just laughed harder. And that was when it hit me. Karen wasn't feared anymore. She wasn't respected. She wasn't even tolerated. She was a punchline. And punchlines don't run neighborhoods. But even as I sat by my pool that evening, beer in hand, watching the water shimmer under the lights, I knew better than to relax completely. Karen wasn't built for disappearing quietly. No, people like her don't fade. They thrash, they claw, they plot. And somewhere in that quiet house next door, I knew Karen was plotting still. Silence isn't surrender. I told myself that 100 times since the newsletter went out, and I was right. Karen had gone quiet, but quiet for her didn't mean defeated. It meant plotting. The first signs were petty. A patch of dead grass on my front lawn, salt poured in the night. A couple of garbage bags mysteriously dumped near my driveway. Childish pranks done under cover of darkness. The kind of stunts she thought would send me spiraling. But I didn't take the bait. I smiled. I waved when I saw her, even as she ducked behind her curtains, because deep down I knew she was waiting for a stage, and that stage came sooner than anyone expected. The summer block party, the biggest event of the year. Hot dogs on the grill, kids with sparklers, folding tables lined with crock-pots and pies. The entire neighborhood would be there. And Karen knew it was her one chance to make a comeback, to claw back whatever scraps of authority she still believed belonged to her. I arrived with my wife and kids, cooler of sodas in hand. Neighbors greeted us with claps on the back, smiles, jokes about bleach and community spirit. The air was lighter, freer, like the whole block had taken a breath it had been holding for years. And then Karen appeared. Wide-brimmed hat, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like a scepter. She slithered in like nothing had changed, shoulders back, chin high, strutting through the crowd as if her crown had never slipped. The moment she opened her mouth, the air shifted. "Excuse me," she barked, pointing at a row of cars parked along the curb. "These vehicles are clearly violating HOA guidelines. We'll need to address this immediately." No one moved, no one nodded. Instead, someone rolled their eyes. She pressed on louder, "And this grill's smoke, it's a nuisance against code." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Actual laughter. Parents, teenagers, even the HOA board president chuckled under their breath. Karen's voice sharpened. "And that child," she pointed at a boy zipping past on a scooter, "that's unsafe. We need to regulate." Before she could finish, a dad called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Careful, Karen. He might need to bleach the pavement after that scooter leaves marks." The crowd erupted, roaring laughter, applause, whistles. Karen's face flushed crimson beneath her hat. She shrieked, her voice breaking, "This is harassment. You can't treat me this way." And that's when Michael, the HOA president, stepped forward. Calm, steady. The man who'd once wilted under her interruptions now looked her dead in the eye. "Karen," he said firmly, "you are no longer on the board. You have no authority here. And given your repeated violations, you should consider yourself lucky you're not facing legal charges." A hush fell. You could hear the sizzle of burgers on the grill, the crackle of a sparkler in some child's hand. Karen froze, her clipboard trembled. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For years, that clipboard had been her weapon. Now, in front of everyone, it was just a piece of plastic. And then she dropped it. The clipboard hit the pavement with a hollow clatter. Karen spun on her heel and stormed away, her hat slipping, her sunglasses askew. The crowd erupted again, not in cruelty, but in sheer relief. For the first time in years, they were free. I stood among them, my wife's hand in mine, my kids tugging at my arm, neighbors slapping my back and grinning. And I realized this wasn't just about a pool. This was about power, about fear, about standing up when everyone else stayed quiet. Karen's reign was over. Not because I'd ruined her hair, not because I'd shown a video, but because the neighborhood, the people she'd bullied and intimidated, finally saw through her. That night back at my pool, I sat in my chair, beer in hand, listening to my kids splash under the glow of the floodlight. The water shimmered clean, calm, unbothered. My wife smiled at me, book in her lap, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt peace. Real peace. Karen was finished. And I had finally won. Or so I thought. Because deep down a whisper lingered. People like Karen don't vanish, they don't slink off quietly. They thrash, they claw, they look for cracks in the foundation. And though her clipboard was broken, though her crown was shattered, one truth gnawed at me even as I leaned back in satisfaction. Karen wasn't done, not yet. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's this: they don't just fade away. They linger, they plot. They lash out in small, desperate ways, even when their kingdom has already crumbled. After the block party, she went quiet again. Too quiet. And in that silence, I caught the signs of her claws scraping for any last shred of control. A dead patch of grass on my lawn where someone had poured salt. A trash bag mysteriously dropped in my driveway. Petty, childish sabotage, but none of it landed the way she wanted. If anything, it showed just how far she'd fallen. Because before, her power was absolute. Neighbors bowed their heads, obeyed her clipboard commands, swallowed her insults. Now, the same neighbors rolled their eyes and laughed. The same parents who once pulled their kids inside now encouraged them to ride their scooters faster, louder, right past her house. The same people who once trembled at her footsteps now treated her like background noise. The queen had no subjects left. And yet I didn't celebrate the way I thought I would. Sitting by my pool, beer in hand, listening to my kids splash, I felt peace, yes. Relief, yes, but also something else. A weight. Because as much as I hated her, I had to admit, Karen had been undone not just by her arrogance, but by my hand, too, by the bleach, by the cameras, by the evidence I chose to wield. I hadn't just defended myself. I'd humiliated her. And though she deserved it, though she'd earned every ounce of it, a part of me wondered where the line really was. Peace isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of respect. And for months I'd let her strip mine away. I'd mistaken surrender for peace. I'd stayed quiet, thinking I was keeping harmony. But silence without boundaries isn't harmony at all. It's permission. And permission only feeds the bully. That was the lesson staring me in the face as I watched Karen shrink into her own bitterness. Bullies don't stop until someone forces them to. And sometimes the only way to stop them isn't loud or violent or cruel. It's smart, patient, precise. Like bleach in a pool. The neighborhood changed after that, not overnight but slowly, steadily. The fences felt taller. The sidewalks felt freer. Parents smiled more, kids laughed louder, even the board meetings felt lighter without Karen's shrill interruptions. People stopped walking on eggshells. They stopped living under her shadow. And me, I wasn't just the grumpy neighbor with the pool anymore. I was the guy who stood up. The one who drew the line. The one who reminded everyone that boundaries matter, that respect isn't optional, it's the foundation of a community. One evening, weeks later, I walked past Karen's house. Her roses had wilted, her lawn grew wild, her driveway was empty. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of her, alone, slouched in a chair, staring blankly at a TV screen. No friends, no clipboard, no crown. For a moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered the months of trespassing, the smirks, the Facebook posts, the way she mocked and belittled and trampled on everyone around her. And I realized pity wasn't mine to give. She'd written her own ending. That night, sitting by my pool again, I looked at the calm water, at my kids laughing, at my wife's quiet smile. And I realized this little patch of backyard wasn't just a pool, wasn't just water and chlorine and chemicals. It was a symbol, a reminder that home isn't just something you own, it's something you protect. Karen had paid the price, not just with her hair, not just with fines, but with the one thing she valued most: control, attention, the illusion of power. And me, I'd gained something better, not revenge, not even victory. Peace. Real peace. So if you're listening to this and you've got your own Karen, The neighbor who pushes too far, the bully who won't quit, the person who thinks rules don't apply to them. Remember this, you're not powerless. You don't have to shout, you don't have to fight fire with fire, you just have to be smart, patient, creative. Set your boundaries, protect what's yours, and when they cross the line, don't be afraid to make them pay the price. Because bullies only win if you let them. And the moment you stand up, calm, steady, unshakable, you change everything. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. What's the worst HOA or neighbor story you've ever faced? And if you want more outrageous HOA drama, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, what comes next, you don't want to miss it. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.